That night, the rain poured down like a flood. She sat curled up in the cold, dim room, cradling her newborn baby in her arms. Beside her lay the divorce papers, ink barely dry, and her husband's final message, "I can't take this anymore." No apology, no turning back. Her world, once a warm home, shattered in an instant. And from that moment on, she knew, the road ahead would be just her and her child. Her name was Lon. 27 years old. Just 3 months postpartum, her body still weak, her mind still fragile after battling postpartum depression. She had believed that the baby would be the bond that brought her and her husband closer after everything they'd been through. But reality was far more cruel. The man who once held her hand and vowed to love her forever disappeared in silence, leaving behind only a text message, a few heartless words like a cold verdict from a judge. The dingy little room she had hurriedly rented in a slum was now the only shelter she had. Both families had turned their backs on her. Her own parents couldn't accept that she had thrown away her future for a man they deemed unworthy. Her in-laws saw her as bad luck for giving birth to a girl. Lon had no one left. Only the crying baby in her arms bore witness to the crushing pain and helplessness that had consumed her. The days that followed felt like an endless nightmare. She didn't have enough milk to feed her baby because she barely ate. Every night, the baby cried from hunger, from the cold. Lon held her child and sobbed in silence, suffocating in despair. She had thought of death, an easy way out for the both of them. But each time that thought crept in, her baby's wide, innocent eyes would pull her back, whispering softly, "Mommy, I need you." Lon had once been a bright, educated girl with dreams, with love. But now, everything had collapsed so quickly that she couldn't even recognize herself in the mirror. Sunken eyes, tangled hair, calloused hands from scrubbing dishes and washing clothes just to scrape together a few coins for baby formula. Life had transformed her from a hopeful young woman into a hollow shadow, drained of tears. People around her looked at her with either pity or scorn. Single mom, 2 words that seemed harmless, but in reality, were a silent sentence. Wherever she went, she carried the weight of shame and judgment, as if bringing a child into an unstable life was a crime. But deep down, Lon knew she didn't regret keeping her baby. That child was the only reason she still had to keep breathing. In the darkest days, she couldn't see what the future held. But one thing she knew for certain, she couldn't fall. Because if she fell, what would happen to her child? And from within the ruins of her life, something small began to stir, a fragile, yet strangely resilient seed of strength. In the early days after everything fell apart, Lon lived like a shadow, exhausted, drifting, directionless. But then, one night, her baby spiked a high fever. The crying grew weak from fatigue, and Lon felt her heart being crushed by fear. In a panic, she clutched her child and ran through the pouring rain to a health clinic nearly 3 kilometers away, because she didn't have enough money for a ride. Every step felt like her heart might burst. When they arrived, the doctor told her it was only a throat infection, but had she waited just a few more hours, it could have been life-threatening. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat holding her baby, watching each steady breath with trembling hands. For the first time, she truly understood how fragile the line between life and death could be. And for the first time, even in her most broken moment, she didn't think about dying anymore. Because if she gave up, who would run through the night to save her child? From that moment on, Lon began a new journey, not just to survive, but to truly live. She asked an elderly neighbor to watch her baby in the mornings and started working any job she could find. First, she washed dishes at a local eatery near her room. The work was hard, the owner demanding, the pay minimal, but Lon gritted her teeth and endured. She worked from early morning till noon, then rushed to do garment piecework at a small home-based factory, and at night, she scoured the neighborhood collecting recyclables. Her hands became scorched from hot oil, her nails peeled from hours soaked in water, and her body ached constantly, but she never allowed herself to stop. With her first earnings, she bought a big can of formula milk. When her baby no longer had to drink diluted rice water or cry from hunger, Lon wept with joy. Each day felt like she was crawling out of a pit, using bloodied knees to climb. She began learning again, not in a classroom, but from life itself. A friend lent her an old phone, and she started searching online for home-based jobs. She taught herself how to trim threads, sew buttons, even do basic data entry. At night, when her child slept, Lon practiced typing, painstakingly hunting each key like a child learning to read. She only slept 3 hours a night, but not once did she complain. She knew she couldn't rely forever on low-paid daily labor, so she saved up to buy a second-hand sewing machine. The first few nights in front of it, her hands trembled and tears fell. But soon, the machine whirred to life, steady and strong, like her heartbeat coming back after years of silence. The road wasn't smooth, she got scammed, had customers cancel orders, and once, when her child got seriously ill, she had to sell the last pair of earrings her mother had left her. But instead of breaking, Lon grew stronger with every setback. The old pain didn't disappear, but now, it fueled her forward. She was no longer the woman who once collapsed in that tiny rented room. She was rebuilding her life, day by day, with her own 2 hands. For herself. And more importantly, for her child. After nearly 2 years of drowning in the grind of work, hardship, and tears, Lon finally began to see the first flickers of light. She had built up a modest but steady stream of customers who came to her for simple tailoring work at home. The once cramped, rundown room she rented was now cleaner, more orderly. And her little daughter, now almost 3, had stopped crying through the night and had started stringing together her first sentences. "Mommy, you're amazing." Just 4 little words, soft as a breath, but they made Lon choke up, unable to speak. When did this happen? When did she, the woman who had once been abandoned, who had once knelt on the floor sobbing in despair, become amazing in her daughter's eyes? Still, the journey wasn't all roses. One day, her daughter came down with a high fever. Lon had to cancel a string of urgent orders to rush her to the hospital. After 3 sleepless days by the bedside, her daughter's fever finally broke, but Lon had spent nearly all her savings, and the delay cost her a major client. That day, on the bus ride home, Lon leaned her head against the window, tears streaming silently. She asked herself, What's the point of trying so hard, when one illness can wipe out everything? Then, an elderly woman sitting next to her, someone she'd never met, spoke gently. "You know, I've been watching you since this morning. You look exhausted, but your eyes still have light in them. Not everyone has the strength to start over after life knocks them down." That sentence rang through her like a bell. Lon looked at herself again. From a frightened, abandoned young woman, she had become someone who could care for her child, hold a job, and cling to hope even if only in small pieces. She was no longer just a pitiful single mother in the eyes of the world. She was a person independent, resilient, and worthy. Lon realized that all this time, she had been living with the weight of having to hold it together for her child, for appearances. She had never allowed herself to be weak, to breathe. But in that quiet moment on the bus, she accepted herself, not perfect, but strong enough. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone. All she had to do was live with kindness for herself and for her daughter. From then on, Lon began to change. She held her head higher when she walked outside. She no longer flinched when she said, "I'm a single mom," not as a scar, but as a badge of honor. She began to carve out moments for herself, reading books, learning new skills, daring to dream of a future beyond just survival, a life where she could truly live. It wasn't a grand transformation, but it was a powerful turning point. Lon was no longer a woman running from the past. She had turned around, faced it, and chosen forgiveness, not just for the one who left her, but for the version of herself who once felt too broken to go on. Since the day Lon truly awakened, realizing her own worth and choosing to live not just to survive, everything began to change, quietly but steadily. She no longer did everything just to make ends meet. Instead, she started thinking about building something lasting. She took courses in professional tailoring techniques, expanded her design portfolio, photographed her own products, and created a small online store. At first, only a few people bought from her, mostly out of sympathy. But over time, more and more customers returned. They didn't just buy a dress or a pair of pajamas, they came because they could see the care, the honesty stitched into every seam. In each piece, Lon poured the faith of someone who had fallen to the bottom but chose to rise again with her own two hands. She moved out of the damp, cramped rental and into a brighter space, one with sunlight for her daughter to play in during the mornings, and a tiny desk for her to scribble her first letters. One day, a former university friend, someone who had once kept their distance after learning Lon was a single mother, unexpectedly messaged her, proposing to team up and open a small tailor shop. Lon hesitated for a long time, but eventually said yes. Not because she fully trusted the friend, but because now, she trusted herself. She was no longer afraid of getting hurt. Her first tailoring shop opened in a narrow alleyway, warm and modest. Most of her customers were moms, factory workers, students. There was no flashy sign, no big advertising campaign, yet the shop always had people coming and going. Because it didn't just sell clothes, it offered something deeper. Many single mothers stopped by, not just to buy, but to talk, to share their stories, and to hear Lan's She began getting invitations to speak at small gatherings, local women's groups, community centers, even a spot on a local radio program themed Women Who Overcome Hardship. On the first day she held the microphone, her hands still trembled. But when she began to tell her story, the whole room fell silent. Not out of pity, but out of admiration. They no longer saw her as the woman who was abandoned, but as a resilient mother, a true source of inspiration. The most unexpected moment came one late afternoon near the end of the year. A woman stood outside her shop for a long time before stepping in. Her hands trembled as she handed Lon a small bag. Inside was a tiny, worn baby outfit and a letter. It was her ex-mother-in-law. With a shaky voice, the woman apologized for turning her back all those years ago, for staying silent when her son walked away. "My son was wrong," she whispered, voice cracking. "But my grandchild was never at fault. Thank you for raising her well." Lon didn't say anything. She simply smiled. She no longer carried anger. The pain of the past was now just a memory. One that reminded her. Forgiveness is its own kind of victory. From a single mother once quietly struggling in the shadows, Lon now walks in the light of her own making, not loud, not flashy, but steady and strong. Her little tailoring shop runs smoothly, and her daughter, now a bright and healthy first grader, proudly tells her friends, "My mom is a superhero." Life isn't necessarily easier, but these days, no hardship can shake Lon the way they once did. She's learned to adapt, to accept, and even to smile. Instead of fearing what tomorrow might bring, she's learned to cherish the present, morning sewing in the early sun, riding her daughter to school on their old bike, affectionately nicknamed the Warhorse. Lon never stopped learning. At night, after her daughter sleeps, she takes online classes in business management and digital marketing. She began writing her story on a personal blog, not to seek pity, but to share something stronger, hope. Surprisingly, her very first post gained thousands of shares. Countless women messaged her, saying her story gave them the courage to start over. Lon realized she wasn't just building a tailoring shop or a new life for her and her child. She was building a safe space, a place where women who once lost their way could find each other, support each other, and rise again. What started as a blog soon grew into a small online community for single moms, a space where anyone could speak, cry, and be heard. One afternoon, while biking her daughter home from school, they passed the road where, years ago, Lon had once run through the rain carrying her feverish child, desperate to find help. Her daughter asked, "Mom, were you scared back then?" Lon paused, glanced at her through the rearview mirror. "Of course. I was terrified. But what scared me most was losing you. That's why I kept trying." "So, are you not scared anymore?" Lon smiled. "No. I have you now. I'm not afraid of anything." That answer wasn't just for her daughter. It was for herself, past, present, and future. Lan's story didn't end with some magical twist. No one came back to apologize and make things right. No man showed up to rescue her and her child. But something more miraculous happened. She rescued herself. With love, with grit, and with the strength to rise each time she fell. Lon keeps on living, not to fight fate, but to co-author it, to help write a story worth telling. A story she can one day tell her daughter proudly. That her mother had once fallen hard, but found her way back from the edge. On her own 2 feet. With a heart that refused to give up. Life isn't always fair. Sometimes, it throws us into the deepest corners of pain without warning. But like Lon, each of us has a choice, to stay down forever, or to stand up even on trembling legs, with a heart full of scars. The journey of that single mother isn't a fairy tale. It's real, raw, rough, and yet radiant in its own unique way. Because within every breath of resilience, every silent tear, is a heart that refuses to let go. If you're in the darkest days of your life right now, please don't lose hope. Light doesn't always come from the outside. Sometimes, it begins with one small decision, not to give up today. And who knows? Maybe one day, you'll tell your own story. Not as a victim, but as someone who made it through. Beautifully. Bravely. Deservedly.